Today's episode of the Star Local Media High School Sports Podcast is brought to you by Baylor Scott & White Sports Performance Center, athletes made here. The Sports Performance Center was developed with one goal in mind: to maximize human performance through movement and recovery. Their team of expert performance sports coaches and trainers will guide you to achieve your performance goals. That's the Baylor Scott & White Sports Performance Center, located at the Star in Frisco. This episode is also brought to you by Allen Dental Studio. Located off Bethany Drive in Allen, their office was designed with you, the patient, in mind, which means an excellent and enjoyable experience. From cosmetics to implants, you deserve a perfect smile, and Allen Dental Studio can make that happen. Also, don't want to leave out another longtime friend of the podcast, Texan Senior Residential Care Homes. With locations in Carrollton and Dallas, Texan Senior Residential Care Homes offers an affordable, high-quality alternative to senior living. Call now at 469-400-7650. That's Texan, spelled T-E-X-S-E-N, Texan Senior Residential Care Homes. Welcome to another episode of the Star Local Media High School Sports Podcast. My name is Matt Welch, being joined by Bryan Murphy. It is a Monday afternoon. It's been a busy Monday already, Bryan. We did our all-area volleyball team voting earlier in the day. It's been moving day for Star Local Media in general. We've officially moved into our new office.
I don't know if the viewers can tell. We're in a different setup. I mean,
no, it's just this nice little green, or kind of like a bluish, greenish background or whatnot behind the banner and whatnot. So it's been a busy day. We don't have any construction noises in the background. Thank God.
What a nightmare.
That was the worst. That was the worst last week. Again, sincerest apologies for y'all, and if anybody who was able to make it through the entire episode last week without batting an eye, you're a warrior and a hero. So yes, we are all moved into our new digs, and the podcast must go on. Nevertheless, hope everybody had a great Thanksgiving. Bryan, hope you had a great Thanksgiving as well, buddy.
I did. I had the best Black Friday ever. We'll talk about that in a little bit.
Did you ever, man? So yes, it is Monday, though. We have to talk the high school football playoffs, and as the title of this podcast would allude, we are down to 4 teams left in the high school football playoffs. We have 3 that are still in contention for state championships in the UIL brackets, and then we have 1 who will go for a state championship over in the TAPS private school bracket on Friday. So let's talk about those teams that are still alive and kicking, and then we will, on the second half of the podcast, we can talk about a few of the teams that played their final games of the season over the weekend. Bryan, you just talked about your Black Friday, man, and it was probably, I think it's fair to say, at least around the area, the most anticipated third-round matchup of the postseason. It happened again, man. I mean, Lone Star and Highland Park, we knew that they were destined for a playoff rematch. The game definitely took on a much different scope than that first meeting, but the outcome stays the same, and the Rangers do it again and knock off the Scots for the second time this season in what sounded like just an absolute incredible football game.
The rematch, it was as advertised, man. It was better than the first showdown between the two, which was a little lopsided. You know, you saw Lone Star kind of jump out on Highland Park, back in September 24 to nothing. You're like, what is going on? Well, it looked like that was going to be the case. Friday night at AT&T Stadium, and Marvin Mims, scored just 4 plays in, and I tweeted it out, and I was just, super hyped up. I was like, who else? Marvin Mims, let's go. And, it was like, are we really about to go through this again? Lone Star kind of give it to Highland Park a little bit, but that wasn't the case. Chandler Morris and the Scots, they played much better. They were at the top of their game. Morris had 3 total touchdowns in this game, over 300 total yards in this game. He didn't turn the ball over in this game, but Lone Star still wins. When you have Garrett Rangel, going for 417 yards and 3 touchdowns, despite your ground game only going for 46 total yards, Jake Bogdan was kind of held in check, and then Jaden Nixon, who scored the game-winning touchdown, who wasn't even with Lone Star, a year ago. He was at McKinney Boyd, and then his dad, coaches, with Lone Star and whatnot, and he makes the move, and the junior scores the game-winning touchdown in overtime from 18 yards out. Take away that run, Lone Star only has, 30-something rushing yards for the game. And the to be able to do that and still beat, Highland Park, the 3-time defending state champs. We're going to have a new state champion in 5A Division I.
For the first time since, what, 2015?
2015.
Somebody who's not named Highland Park is going to have a state championship in 5A D1.
Yeah, this Highland Park team that has given, Spencer Sanders some fits over at Denton Ryan over the years. But Lone Star, man, I told Coach Rayburn in the tunnel after the game, we were kind of walking out together, and I said, man, y'all have to win state now, man.
You can't not beat Highland Park and then just, let up in the next round or the semis.
And I know it doesn't get easier. I'm sure we'll talk about that later. There's still some teams, that face a Lancaster team, Friday night in Rockwall that they've been battle tested. They've faced 3 of the top offenses in the entire state, regardless of classification. When you're talking the Colony, McKinney North, probably arguably the best offense, in everywhere, putting up crazy numbers. They shut them down, and then obviously Independence last week, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. That Lancaster defense is legit, and if Lone Star can get by them, then they'd have to potentially face a Denton Ryan team in the state semis, and it's not going to be easy, but they are the clear-cut favorites to win the state championship now that they've knocked out Highland Park.
So much about that first game was really kind of the first note this season that the Marvin Mims spectacle was just going to be on another level with that performance that he had in that first game against Highland Park. Did you kind of get the sense that they were basically going to try to do everything in their power to not let him do kind of have that same impact on the game this time?
Marvin Mims was blanketed and double teamed and had safety help over the top the entire game, the entire night. That first drive, they kind of pulled some trickery. Actually, the first play was a pass to Marvin Mims. He throws it back to Rangel, and then he launches it deep. I believe it was Trace Bruckler that hauled in that first catch of the game, and that really got them going and got them in deep in Highland Park territory, and that's why they scored on that first drive so quick. Because Rayburn and Mark Humble, one of the best offensive coordinators in the state, they pulled out some big time trickery to start off the game, kind of give them a little uppercut there. But other than that first drive when Mims scored, and then Mims had a spectacular catch in double coverage. Kind of was a slip up by the Highland Park secondary. I'm not sure what was going on there. It was on 4th down, by the way, in that second half. Lone Star was down at that point. What was the score? It was 24-20. Lone Star was losing. Then they drive down. They face a 4th down, and the play I'm talking about is when Garrett Rangel just lobs it up to Marvin Mims in the end zone and catches it in double coverage. Other than that, he had 6 catches, 96 yards, 2 touchdowns.
Still really good.
That's a career day for most receivers anywhere. But for him, that's a little subpar. Because for him, it's 200 yards, 3 touchdowns. That's his average right there. But it let guys like Trace Bruckler, who is a phenomenal receiver. He's been balling all season. He had 14 catches for 163 yards. He did not score, but he also drew multiple defensive pass interference penalties in this game. He was a major impact. You could say he was the most impactful player on the offense, right there next to a Marvin Mims. More than a Jaden Nixon. You allowed guys like Tolo Sequoia to catch a big touchdown early in the second half. He had 73 receiving yards. For the person that hasn't maybe seen Lone Star play or doesn't really cover them, it's like, who are these guys? Who's Trace Bruckler? Who's Tolo Sequoia? Who's Jaden Nixon? Well, those guys, it's not just Jake Bogdan. It's not just Marvin Mims. There's a collection of guys. There's a reason why this team is #1 in the state. And when you focus so much attention on Marvin Mims, a really, really, really good player like Trace Bruckler, who's only a junior, who I think undoubtedly will play D1 college football somewhere. He's got the size, 6'3", and still growing. Guys like that, they're going to ball out, and they're going to do their thing, and he did that against a really good Highland Park team. And Trace Bruckler, man, his name is now going to be recognized, in the high school football Texas universe here in these coming weeks. And
you wonder what just the collective sentiment around that program is, because it's one thing, to do it against Highland Park in September, and granted they did it in Highlander Stadium where nobody's, Texas team has won since 1998.
And beat them at AT&T, which is pretty much their second home over the last decade.
That's the thing, because there was, on the picket line, you and I, were still thinking that Lone Star had enough in the tank to get it done, but we were at a disadvantage, as the other 3 members of the staff.
When are people going to stop picking against Lone Star?
But that was the thing, just because, it's one thing to do it in the regular season, but Highland Park does have that pedigree in the playoffs.
They do.
Just those intangibles into AT&T Stadium that you just can't really, really put a statistic on. So for for Lone Star to be able to do that to Highland Park on a stage like that in a venue like that, it really does kind of validate that this team is at least right now the best in 5A Division I. And yeah, I mean, you knock off Highland Park, and I mean, granted, you look at the rest of the bracket. I mean, there's still plenty of difficult matchups remaining. If they're able to, I mean, they, as we'll talk about later on, like Lancaster is going to present an entirely new bag of problems for them. And then if they get past them, then they might see Denton Ryan, and then there's still Shadow Creek over in the other half of the bracket. It's still a long way to go.
Yeah, Denton Ryan ranked number 3 right now. Shadow Creek ranked number 2, and Lancaster I think was number 6 last time I saw. So they'd have to go through all 3 of those teams on top of already beating Highland Park. That emotional high of beating Highland Park. How do you gear up and get your guys ready to play another game, more round, even multiple games for a state title? It felt like they won the state championship last week against Highland Park. There were so many videos on Twitter and everything of the scene, the celebration. You have Jeff Rayburn, the head coach of Lone Star, just giving Jay Nixon the biggest hug. The entire sideline raced down to the end zone to celebrate. It was something similar to what you'd see winning a state title.
And realistically, you're just halfway through the playoff.
Yeah, and it's just going to get harder from here.
So yes, the state championship dream is still alive for Frisco Lone Star, a team that we probably expected to be making a deep run to this caliber. Ditto for Argyle, which the number 1 ranked team in 4A Division I, and their pursuit of a state championship is very much still alive. I was out there in Waco, out at McLean Stadium at Baylor, to see them take on Brownwood after the way that they had to just go blow for blow with Stephenville in that second round matchup, a game that they ended up pulling away late. It was tied 49-49 in the second half. They pull away, win that one 63-49. What would the response be against a stout Brownwood team? And it's the beauty of this thing, at least from the Argyle perspective, they win this game first off 42-14. Is you see a team like Argyle that has so much talent on offense that they basically played 2 completely different styles of offense between the game against Brownwood and against Stephenville, and they were just as successful at both of them. Against Stephenville, it was all about that passing game. Bo Hogaboom had one of the a passing performance that you just will not see at the high school level too often. He had 458 passing yards and 8 touchdowns.
And he's not even a traditional football player. He's going to college to play baseball. Like, imagine being that good.
This is an off-season sport.
Like, he just plays football probably for fun, and he throws 8 touchdowns in a third-round playoff game.
Yeah, I mean,
must be nice.
He had 8 passing touchdowns. Cole Kirkpatrick, their lead receiver, he had 5 receiving touchdowns.
He's been a game changer for that offense.
Oh, yeah.
Especially with Tito Bryce being out for the year, their stud running back, and then have a guy like Cole Kirkpatrick who annihilated Salina when they played him as well. Man, he's a stud.
I'm curious to see, because again, like for all we talk about the Marvin Mims, and then even as we'll mention later on, Rock Walsh, Jackson Smith, and Jigba, Cole Kirkpatrick's got some pretty nice receiving numbers at the 4A level, as well as that Argyle offense has just been lights out. But they didn't need to throw the ball a ton against Brownwood. It was all about that run game, and it's a run game that's been a little bit depreciated, over the weeks with their starting running back Tito Bryce. He's out with an injury for the season. They've had to fall back on Luke Ferris, who got dinged up for a bit against Stephenville, and then Knox Scoggins. Ferris was back for the Brownwood game, but they're huge. They combined help Argyle run for 289 rushing yards on almost 7 yards per carry. Just really dominated time of possession, and they only needed Bo Hoogum to throw the ball 20 times. And they won, 42-14. A much better performance by that defense, which had a really, really tough time with some of the firepower that Stephenville offense possessed, and it looked much more like you'd expect out of a team that's ranked number 1 in the state. You were wondering there against Stephenville, because with each round of the playoffs, you kind of learn a little bit more about these teams as they face, more upper echelon competition, and to see them get tripped up against Stephenville, like it's a
Stephenville team is pretty good though. Some of those in that region in 4A, a lot of those second round matchups are really tough. And then we saw that last year when Salina played Stephenville, and Salina played them really tough, and Salina got rolling, got really hot. But Stephenville was the better team last year. Everyone was picking Stephenville to make a run, and Stephenville was giving Argyle good games in the last couple years. So really, that one didn't surprise me. I think that was just a matchup that should have been played later on in the playoffs. But that just shows you how good Argyle is.
Yeah. No, I mean, Brownwood, though, they're a quality team. They're number 8 in the state. They were 11-1 coming into this game. They went to the regional finals last season.
Okay. Other than that, I couldn't tell you anything about.
Or I guess I could say it was going to be their. They've been there within the last 5 years.
Gotcha,
they're still a quality program, so it wasn't like they beat up on some scrub.
But they're no Argyle.
No. Argyle is in a tier of its own right now, and we'll see now what that means moving forward, because they get to rematch La Vega coming.
We knew this was going to happen. Yeah. We knew. Everyone knew. And they've already played. They played non-district the last 2 years. They played last year.
These are two teams that avoided each other for quite some time. And then Friday, back at McLean Stadium, which I wonder if that'll be what kind of impact that's going to have on the atmosphere, because I can't imagine Waco La Vega High School is too far away from McLean Stadium.
And they must have flipped. They must have.
A little bit, but it's a case where this is going to be the fourth time since September of last year we're going to have played. Argyle's currently got the lead 2-1 in that series.
But La Vega won the one that really mattered.
That's right. So we'll see what it means. La Vega was a little fortunate to squeak by Melissa, 45-42.
And I didn't predict a Melissa win, but I did say they're going to give La Vega a big test. Don't discredit and overlook Melissa. And I remember we talked about it earlier today. And even though Brendan Lewis didn't have the best game, that Melissa offense is pretty powerful.
They still moved the ball pretty well against La Vega.
And they had the lead late.
It was 42-35 Melissa inside 4.5 minutes to go. So La Vega needed some heroics to advance to the regional final. So yes, that game is Friday. We'll talk about that one later on in the week, though, with our Game of the Week podcast and whatnot. But yes, Argyle is on to the fourth round. Lone Star is on to the fourth round, and so is Prosper.
Who would have thought? It's like the meme. It's like, look, it's Jesuit and Prosper looking at each other. It's like
the Paul Rudd.
The Paul Rudd. And it's like, look at us. Who would have thought? Not me.
Not me.
No, Allen is at home. And Jesuit and Prosper are the two representatives still kicking a 9-6A in the fourth round.
It blows the mind. Yes, Prosper, which, hey, we thought that as long as they could avoid falling into the crosshairs of Longview in the second round again, that there was perhaps a pathway where they could get a little hot. But now, would you look at it, man, they are in the regional finals. And it's going to be a tall task, but nevertheless, though, they scored a very, very impressive victory over the Woodlands. A pretty convincing one at that.
Yeah, I was shocked. Did we all pick Prosper to win that game?
I think so.
But we didn't think it was going to be like that.
No, I didn't think they'd have it with them. So, I know obviously you couldn't be at that game, Brian, but what kind of stood out in that performance about Prosper taking care of the Woodlands with the ease that they did?
Jackson Berry throwing for 312 yards is season high. What better time to do that than
ideal timing.
Then in the third round against the Woodlands, Hayden Metcalf, he had one of his best games ever, 10 catches, 141 yards, and 4 touchdowns. And JT Lane rushes for over 100 yards. It's just when that offense is really flowing like that, they score touchdowns on their first 3 drives of the second half to really give them a knockout blow when things were kind of close there in that first half. It just seemed like the Prosper offense was rolling. They forced 4 turnovers. When you win the turnover battle 4-1 like that, and your offense is clicking on every single cylinder, it's the perfect storm, man. It looks like Prosper is really gelling at the right time. Going into the playoffs, it was like, all right, they can't beat the good teams. They're.
I thought they could have a back and forth game with Mesquite in the second round.
Yeah, and it's like, all right, well, against the quote unquote elite teams, and I guess you put Jesuit in that category, or a team maybe on the
regional
same
final is Jesuit.
Well, yeah, we knew they were good. We didn't know that good, but Jesuit annihilated Prosper. Obviously, Allen annihilated Prosper in the regular season, but Prosper annihilated everyone else. And it's like, well, that might get them into some trouble once they face some formidable foes in the playoffs. And so far, they're rolling. It looks like their toughest test was Mesquite so far.
It looks like that early season team, the one that was the destroyed Flower Mound, and really everybody talking like, okay, this might be the team that could really make Allen sweat a little bit, and obviously didn't pan out that way. But it's a nice turnaround for Prosper. Cool story to see a program that's just in its second year in Class 6A, and they've already made a 4-round playoff run. At least they might go further. Who knows?
It's a tall order, and this is their biggest football playoff game in over a decade, because they had some really good runs in 3A and some runs in 5A, but like to do this at the 6A level in just their second year, you're in the 4th round, that's pretty phenomenal.
They get Rockwall coming up next, man. You wonder what Allen's got to be thinking when they see that this is how the region shook out. Allen, which was stopping a stopped 2-point conversion away from advancing over Rockwall, and
if this game was Allen Prosper, Allen is a 3-touchdown favorite in this game
at least.
At least.
But yes, nevertheless, though, Prosper will step up and try to do what no team in the, I guess outside of Tyler Lee, they're the only team that's figured out a way to solve Jackson Smith-Njigba, who's about as close to unguardable as we've seen as far as high school receivers go in Texas.
And I brought up a good question. At least it was a good question in my head. if you're going to take away, put every Texas high school football player in a pool, to say like 5A, 4A, 5A, and 6A players, put them in a big pool and redraft, and you have the number 1 pick, whatever school you are. Yeah. Are you taking Jackson Smith-Njigba with your number 1 pick? I know it's different in the NFL and stuff, but for high school, the impact that he has on a game, like he beat Allen by himself. Is Jackson Smith-Njigba the best, at least offensive player? I don't want to discredit some of the defensive guys because there's some dominant defensive players, but I mean, right there with Jaquindon Jackson and Duncanville, like who else would you rather have on your offense?
He's made as worthy a case as being the best pound-for-pound high school football player in Texas as anybody, and that again, it's Coach Schmidt and his staff have their work cut out for them, having to figure out a way to slow down the top receiver in the state, one of the top offenses in the state. I mean, it's a different problem than they had facing Jesuit or Allen, because those are teams that Jesuit has the real dynamic backfield out of E.J. Smith and Jake Taylor, and Allen has the quarterback that can run for 150 yards. There just isn't anything like Jackson Smith-Njigba though, and that's
What's the Rockwall running game like though?
I mean, Zach Henry's a really good running back in his own right. Oh yeah, I mean, he's averaging 6-7 yards a carry on his own. Braden Locke's one of the top sophomore recruits in the state.
He's a stud. Yeah,
at quarterback. I mean, they've got but at the same time, like, you can move the ball against them, so perhaps if they could get Jackson Berry, J.T. Lane, Tyler Bailey in that ground game going a bit, then you kind of try to do what Allen wanted to do, and try to at least kind of keep that Rockwall offense shackled at the sidelines. I think that's their only bet, because you're not going to stop them from scoring. You just have to limit the number of opportunities they get. But yes, shout out to Prosper just for making it to the 4th round. Some happy times over there as they continue just to make this transition to 6A. It shouldn't be this easy for them. But
I remember last year I talked with the AD Valerie Little, and she said their goal, obviously, they want to make the transition to 6A and whatnot in the district. I asked, who's your rival so far in 6A? Is it any of the Plano schools or? And they said, no, we want to be compared to a team like Allen, not just in football, but, see how in girls basketball how good they were, and other sports, and soccer and whatnot. And Prosper really thought, in a lot of other sports, they are better than Allen at those. And they said, our rival, and we want to have a better, essentially have a better athletics year, their goal, than Allen. And right now, they
weren't far off last year.
They weren't. And now, look at it this year. There's still a lot of sports left to be played, but it's sports that Prosper's really good at. Their boys basketball team's on the right. We'll talk about those later. And baseball and softball is really good, and their soccer teams are always really good. With them, advancing further in the playoffs than Allen, that could be, I mean, it's all for,
it just means like
opinion based, really, but
and again, it's just how the bracket shook out, because if Rockwall steamrolls them, then it just means that Allen ran into Rockwall first and Prosper ran into him later.
True, but them going to the 4th round adds a little bit more pedigree to that Prosper's case there.
Yeah, they're legit, no doubt. So, man, Prosper, Frisco Lone Star, and Argyle are still vying for championships in the UIL postseason. But man, the story of the Texas high school football playoffs, at least in our coverage area, at least in my coverage area specifically, John Paul II. As we shift gears, talk a little bit of TAPS, talk a little bit of private school football.
George Teague, man.
John Paul, which just a couple weeks ago was coming off its first ever playoff win, a 21-16 grinder over San Antonio Central Catholic, and they're now 1 win away from a state championship.
I don't know.
It's so impressive. It's a program that we thought had a chance to be pretty good coming into this season, just because of the some of the talent upgrades that they've had over on that campus. And they they showed flashes of brilliance throughout the regular season. They had the huge 11 overtime victory over Bishop Dunn. That was their first district victory since 2008. They beat Bishop Lynch later in the season, but they took a loss to Prestonwood, and they got throttled by Parish Episcopal, and it looked like a team that, okay, like this, I think the stars are going to align to where they can get a playoff win. But then after that, though, it's, you're probably going to see the, a team like Fort Worth Nolan, just kind of have their way with them. And then instead, John Paul goes out and they crush Nolan, 43-15 or whatever it was. It was, just an absolutely emphatic display. And I got to go out to Georgetown on Saturday to see them in their state semifinal against San Antonio Antonian, who was coming off a really, really dramatic victory over Prestonwood. A Hail Mary was this. I showed you that highlight, didn't I, Brian?
You did.
Yes, where it bounces off the huddle of players right into the hands of the Antonian receiver. So yeah, they were flying high heading into that semifinal. This was a weird game. John Paul ends up winning ultimately 31-13. This was a 14-13 game at halftime, a game that featured 4 lost fumbles combined within the first quarter and a half. Just both teams looked really, I don't know if you chalk it up to
some
jitters.
Nerves, yeah.
Yeah, being in the semis for the first time at the very least for John Paul. But then John Paul just laid waste to him in the second half. They were down, 14-7, at one point in the late in the second quarter of this game, and then they score the final 24 points of the game. Their run game with Carson Collins, Grant Robinson, they really get things going. They had a lot of effective use. They're kind of an inside running team. They decided to switch things up and go a bit to the outside, use some toss plays that they had a lot of success with there in the second half. But the story was just the job the defense did at just absolutely smothering the Antonian offense. I've never seen anything like that fourth quarter from John Paul's pass rush. Over the last 4 defensive series for John Paul, they had 6 sacks on Khalil Warfield, who's committed to UTEP, I believe, a pretty quality little quarterback for Antonian, and they smoked them, and they ended up winning this thing going away. They fumbled the ball 3 times in this game, including twice on the 1-yard line, and they still won this game by 18 points. So this wasn't far off from being a 30-35 point blowout in favor of John Paul.
So easily the better team.
Yes, as the game went on, you began to get the sense that they dominated the line of scrimmage, and they really, really asserted their will over those last 2 quarters.
What's been the biggest attribute to this massive turnaround?
It's just been like they just have the talent now to compete with the the Prestonwoods.
Was it George T?
They've had some kids. They've definitely had some transfers come in that have definitely impacted things a bit compared to years past when they just didn't have the depth to hang with a lot of those heavyweights. And because you look at programs like Prestonwood and Dunn and Lynch, they're cranking out just numerous Division I prospects, by the score. So just to have kids that can at least compete with that, it's such a different ball game for them. But again, you still had to put it all together between the years, because for as much promise as they showed, there were still instances where they lose to Prestonwood, 22-10, and Parish Episcopal beats them, 47-7. There was, again, something about that Nolan game, just something clicked, and just everything began, especially defensively. The execution just went up a notch, and they've now taken down some legitimate heavyweights and taps, and I'm fascinated to see what it means, because that championship game on Friday, noon out in Waco at Midway Panther Stadium, and they're going to rematch Parish, who again destroyed them 47-7 back in district play. But a lot has changed about John Paul since then, man. They're playing with a completely different swagger, and they've just been rolling in a way that they weren't. And granted, yes, Parish they've been just taking down everybody this season. They beat TC Cedar Hill, on ESPN, which tells you all you need to know about their resume. It felt like them and Nolan were kind of on a crash course to meet in the state title game this season, and then JP destroys Nolan, and we'll see if, perhaps maybe getting a game against Parish on tape, what kind of adjustments they make. But it's a different John Paul team than just 4 or 5 weeks ago. But to what extent, I don't know. Parish is loaded. They got one of the best quarterbacks in the country in Preston Stone. So we will see, man. But yeah, what a cool moment for that program, man. Again, it's one thing to have, to get your first playoff win ever. That's cool. To get your first district win, since in over a decade. That's another impressive milestone. But now to be on the doorstep of a state championship, man. What an improbable run this has been for the Cardinals. That is a look at the 4 teams that are still kicking in our playoff coverage. We had a few, though, that had to bow out, play their final games of the season. We will talk a little bit about their games after a word from this sponsor. Today's podcast is brought to you by Star Local Media. 14 newspapers and websites with a print distribution of 270,000 homes and monthly page views of 600,000 online. Star Local Media, your community voice for news. And now, let's get back to the podcast. And we are back as we continue to play some catch-up from the latest round of the high school football playoffs. We have talked about the teams that have advanced into this week's action. Had a few, though, that had to bow out over the weekend, Brian, including a couple in Frisco ISD. We talked about what a hallmark postseason this was shaping up to be for Frisco ISD, with 3 teams going at least 3 rounds deep. And Lone Star is still alive. The pursuit of the state championship of Frisco ISD football is still very much in play, but they are the sole survivor of the 3rd round from FISD. As Independence and Frisco High both had their seasons come to an end. We talked about what is up next for Lone Star, and that being a showdown with mighty Lancaster. And Independence learned that in a rough way on Friday, man.
The win for Lone Star marked the most wins in one postseason for Frisco ISD. And it was the first time ever that 3 Frisco teams had made it to the 3rd round, which is, a lot to do with them being in 2 different districts, but still, that's a hard thing to do. So, a huge congrats, to teams like Independence making the 3rd round for the first time ever, and Frisco getting back to where they've been much of the decade, especially after, an 0-10 season just 2 years ago. But Independence, man, They just ran into the better team. Yeah. Plain and simple, Lancaster is a better team overall. Trey Bradford, stud running back. Their defense is just phenomenal. They held, Independence to just 3 points for much of the game until Independence scored late in the 4th quarter to make it 34-10 to kind of keep it respectable. But this, it was 3-0, at halftime. Independence, neither team was able to get anything going, but then Lancaster just really, put the pedal to the metal there in the second half. And we've seen Lancaster do that with the Colony. We've seen it do with McKinney North, and now at Frisco Independence. That defense is the real deal, and they just ran into, like I said, the better team. Braylon Braxton, he did all he could do in this game.
About as much as the Lancaster defense is letting anybody do these days. Seriously.
I mean, he's 75 yards through the air, 79 more yards on the ground. Not much, Elijah Arroyo was the guy in this game. 5 catches, 52 yards. But Kion Wafer, who's been that go-to receiver all year long, he only had 2 receiving yards, and that's nothing new. We've seen Lancaster shut down. What's the kid from McKinney North? JJ Henry shut him down. 2 catches for 4 yards, 4 catches for 2 yards, vice versa. Keith Miller, 2 catches for the Colony.
2 yards, yeah.
Yeah, this is nothing new. They know how to shut down, wide receiver ones, elite wide receivers. Hopefully, Marvin Mims has something up his sleeve, and Lone Star can kind of see what Lancaster was able to do against those 3 teams. But yeah, Independence just running into just a complete juggernaut of a defense.
And then it was a close game for a half, but then you also look at what the Lancaster run game was able to do in the second half. Trey Bradford, man, and that's just what they do, man. They just wear you down up front.
Yeah.
It's just so impressive what this defense has done through 3 rounds when you consider, all year long, just the praise that we've heaped on McKinney North and the Colony and Frisco Independence, and just these high-flying spread offenses. Combined, those 3 teams, McKinney North, the Colony, and Independence, the 3 teams that have faced Lancaster in the first 3 rounds of the playoffs. During the regular season, they combined, those 3 offenses averaged 45.7 points per game. And against Lancaster, they averaged 22.3. That's, wow. That defense is just on another level right now. And again, I'm fascinated to know what it means against the best team going right now in 5A Division I. It'll be the best defense that Lone Star has seen by a mile. But yeah, still a great year, though, for the Knights, being able to get this far.
For sure. And Frisco High, too, man. They might have just ran into a better team as well. Ennis,
with another great defense, too.
Yes, and we saw what they did against Reedy, shutting them out 34-0, and they shut out Frisco 17-0. When the Frisco, they rely on that wing tee. No matter what, Kari Green has made and Chase Lowry, they've added another element, a passing game. We know about that. But their bread and butter has been their running game, obviously, all year. When you have 38 rushing yards and you lose the turnover battle, you're gonna lose 17-0.
Yeah.
It's not ideal for a team that is really predicated on running the football. Bryson Clemens has been their guy all year, and he had 9 carries for 21 yards. What?
Yeah.
How does that happen? But yeah, they just weren't able to get that running game going against a really stout Ennis Ennis defense, and now Ennis has to face a team in Aledo that I was able to kind of check them out a little bit, because that was the game after Lone Star Highland Park, part of that triple header at AT&T Stadium, as I was kind of finishing up my stuff, my gamers and whatnot for Lone Star. And every time I looked up, it was Jace McCullen, deep touchdown. Jace McCullen, Earl Stone, or whatever his Earl Steele for Aledo. I think he was committed to Texas Tech as a sophomore. He was scoring.
An all Big 12 backfield.
Seriously. And then I saw a scoop and score at one point. They really just handed it to Red Oak. And Ennis is going to have their hands full with those guys.
And then the last team that we bid adieu to was Marcus. Marcus, which much like these other two, having its best playoff run in a long time. Marcus, who was bound for the third round, I should say, for the first time since 1997. Some happy times over there with the Marauders, as they carried an 11-game win streak into a Saturday's matchup with Amarillo Tascosa, a team that we don't know a ton about, just because of obviously the proximity relative to the rest of our coverage area, but a team that we know all too well, though, what you're going to get stylistically from them, and that's a team that, well, as of now, doesn't even need to complete a pass to win a football game, which they've now done twice this postseason. They only attempted 2 passes on Saturday against Marcus. Didn't complete either, but they still have 468 rushing yards with that triple option flex bone offense of theirs, and that's the thing, man. If they were able to run the ball that effectively, then they're going to be such a tough out for everybody, because you factor in how much time of possession that had to accumulate, and with Marcus, which has one of the better offenses in the entire Metroplex among 6A teams, they have just 273 yards, against and then you look at again, 66 rushes by any offense, and it's tough to combat that. And Marcus didn't. They get 163 passing yards from Garrett Nussmeier, well below par for what he usually puts out there. He had 2 touchdowns. J. Michael Sturdivant had 9 catches, but for 49 yards and a touchdown. So the Tascosa defense wasn't giving up anything either. The run game just never took off for Marcus. So this was a game that kind of got out of hand early on. They ended up losing this game 46-14. They were down 26-6 in the first half. Just Tascosa just really kind of implementing its bread and butter, and when they're able to kind of play things at their pace, when you're one of those teams that plays a very specific, unique style of football like that's predicated on playing with the lead, winning time of possession, if you're able to consistently do those things, that's going to be tough for anybody to beat. So still doesn't take away from the kind of year Marcus had. They ended up winning a district championship that nobody saw coming out in 6A. With all the talk about Flower Mound and Hebron and Louisville and whatnot, the Marauders just kind of snuck up and had their best season in a long time. And a lot of those guys are going to be back next year, including quarterback Garrett Nussmeier, the lead receiver J. Michael Sturdivant, plenty of guys on defense. So the Marauders they're just getting started, man. But they've built a nice little thing here under Kevin Atkinson, and it comes to an end against a pretty solid Tascosa team, which I'm now that matchup against Denton Geyer in the Region 1 final. That all of a sudden looks much more compelling now, just the role that Tascosa has been on. But yes, we bid adieu to Marcus and Frisco and Independence and whatnot, but we still got a few teams that are left kicking in the postseason. All 4 of them are up for Game of the Week later this week. Or maybe our last poll for Game of the Week, just because eventually we're just going to run out of matchups to put on the poll and whatnot. So you can nevertheless go to our website at starlocalmedia.com to vote on which one is the biggest, whether it's Lone Star and Lancaster, Prosper and Rockwall, Argyle, La Vega, or John Paul and Parish Episcopal. And we'll be back on Thursday to break down the whatever is voted as Game of the Week, plus those other 3 marquee matchups. This has been Matt Welch, Bryan Murphy. Folks, you enjoy the rest of your week, and we will talk to y'all later.